You're watching Capital Conversations with Congressman Mike McIntyre, an opportunity for the people of Southeastern North Carolina to get an inside look at the issues facing the nation and the U.S. Congress. I invite you to see how your community is affected. Now, from Washington, D.C., here's Congressman Mike McIntyre.
Welcome to Capital Conversations. I'm Mike McIntyre, Congressman from here in Southeastern North Carolina, and this program is part of our ongoing efforts to keep you informed about what's going on in Washington and how it affects the folks right back here at home. Today I'm broadcasting from here in Washington with Dallas Tonsager, who is the Undersecretary for Rural Development of the United States Department of Agriculture. He's the top-ranking official in the federal government in charge of revitalizing rural economies, creating jobs on and off the farm. Today we're going to talk about the work that needs to be done to ensure that rural America remains a place that families continue to live and businesses continue to grow. We also are going to talk about some of the unique challenges that face rural America and how Undersecretary Tonsager and I are working together to address these challenges. Undersecretary Tonsager is my friend and partner in rural economic development. And although he's in the executive branch and of course I'm in the legislative, we work together. As many of you may know, I served 4 years as chairman of the subcommittee on rural development, which is part of the Agriculture Committee. And I'm pleased to work with him because he's a true leader in the rural economy and a great friend to North Carolina and indeed to all of rural America. Many folks don't realize that when we talk about rural issues, we're not only talking about those that affect farmers, but also our small towns and our rural communities. In North Carolina, 85 of our 100 counties are classified as rural, so that makes the math easy. 85% of North Carolina is affected by the Farm Bill because it affects rural America. The Undersecretary grew up in Oldham, South Dakota, and he has been involved in family farm operations since 1976. He has over 35 years of business, cooperative, agricultural, and financial experience through his work in the public service or the public sector, as well as a farmer, a businessman, and a community leader. He was appointed by the President as Undersecretary for Rural Development and sworn into office in May of 2009. Prior to his time as Undersecretary, he was appointed to senior level positions by both President Bush and President Clinton in the service of rural America. Dallas, thank you for taking time to be with us today. Thank you for coming here to be on Capital Conversations. This show has been a popular way for people back home to learn more about things that are happening in Washington so they can get the real scoop instead of the filtered scoop, so to speak, through some of the other national news networks. I know you recently were with me in Bladenboro, right in the center of our district in Bladen County, and you were with us to announce 2 rural development projects that we work together on to keep broadband coming to underserved parts of our area. And these projects were great examples of success in ways that we can affect practical things. Broadband we know affects agribusiness, it affects telemedicine, it affects emergency services, it affects educational services. And then also we were excited because we had the opportunity to deliver better health care with radiology services for Bladenboro in a very rural area of Bladen County. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Build On, Build Out initiative that's underway at Rural Development and kind of give your take on the challenges we face in rural America in terms of how we do continue to build when economic times are tough. In particular, we started with rural brand, so let me ask you in that area with telecommunications, for instance.
Sure, and thank you for having me today. I appreciate the time to visit with your constituents and with you.
Yes, sir.
If I could just reflect a little bit, rural America has been very good at building institutions that have been extremely important. The National Rural Electric System, a very long-term project, 70 years, but now virtually every single rural American has safe, affordable electricity. That is, the power comes on and it's reliable, and it's an incredible tribute to the National Rural Electric System, and we financed that from the beginning. And then back in the 1960s and 70s, we also financed and helped build a national rural water system. Now, it isn't everywhere, but we're working on it. We keep working on it every year. And broadband's kind of the same thing. We have to continuously move the ball forward to build this national broadband system and make sure everybody has access. And I think it is just as important as electricity has been, just as important as water has been. Now, on top of that, I think we need to keep seeding the ground for rural business. I mean, the purpose of the broadband system is enormous. There's huge opportunity, but we have to help rural people find those key points where they can build businesses on. So we've been doing video conferences with rural residents, with businesses, with other business structures to help them think about how they can organize businesses where they can sell their products around the world. And I think it's going to be a steady pull. We've had a big boost with the Recovery Act that allowed us to move the ball forward quite a bit. We've got some standing programs that we can keep using. So we've got some 300 projects going right now across the nation that are building broadband access across the country. And we're bringing our business programs along to try and help figure out how we can keep sowing those seeds that are going to build those businesses with this local leadership and local business community.
I know in the last Farm Bill, again, for those just joining our program, we're talking with Undersecretary of Agriculture Dallas Tonsager, and I know in the last Farm Bill, a lot of folks, when we had Farm Bill hearings, thought, well, that's something that our farmers need to go to. Well, they do, and we want to do everything we can to help our farmers. Agriculture is still the #1 impact on the economy of North Carolina. But a lot of folks don't realize the Farm Bill has a great farther reach than that in terms of rural economic development, water and sewer, helping law enforcement, helping our firefighters, our sheriff's departments, our small town police departments. Something that folks know I've been a strong advocate for back home, and wanting to make sure that the taxpayers in rural areas are not forgotten. We all know that this time of year when people are concerned about their taxes, that we want to see some return on our tax money as much as folks in rural or metropolitan areas. People in rural areas should be treated as fairly as those in metropolitan and suburban areas. Recently we were together in talking about increasing access to health services. When we were in Bladenboro, we also announced a rural economic development grant for 4-county EMC, which will benefit the radiology services there in Bladenboro. What are some of the ways, we talked about broadband generally and telecommunications and an impact on business, what's some of the ways that these telecommunications and broadband and rural development are helping with health services as well?
Well, there's several programs. Getting the broadband built and established is, of course, one of those. Another part of what we do is called distance learning and telemedicine. And the way it works, it allows smaller community hospitals to hook up to larger ones. And we have some great examples where grants have been provided to communities to give them the hardware to put, for example, a camera in an emergency room in a local hospital and one in a larger hospital that has specialists, so to speak, so they can watch a person coming into an emergency room and they can see exactly what's occurring with that person and provide advice to the local healthcare provider. And I think that's one of the critical things when we get into these areas that don't have quite the opportunity to have the people they really need in their community, that we can help that along by having that telemedicine access. And the same is true of radiology. You're able to move the pictures back and forth between places, give a radiological analysis of a person, transmit it to a specialist who can look at it closely and has a better skill set perhaps in examining what's being done. So that we're trying to bring to the most remote parts of the country the same kind of skills that are available to everybody everywhere else by using this very efficient technology.
Well, and I know in Bladenboro how grateful the folks were to have those radiological services come about, and what a thrill that was to announce that recently. The concerns about healthcare, I still remember the first visit I made to Goshen Medical Clinic up in northern Duplin County in Faison, was to see an African-American woman who was talking to a medical doctor at the East Carolina University School of Medicine in Greenville, North Carolina. And she did not have means of transportation to get there, was quite concerned about potential for breast cancer that she was dealing with. And having had a mammogram, was able to discuss face-to-face, looking right at the doctor that she could talk to. He could talk about results. He could show her what the results of that mammogram were. And that's when it becomes real, and you realize that how long it might have been before she could have found someone to take her or gotten transportation arranged. But you know, when you face a difficult situation like that, you want answers then, and you don't want to be in a guessing game for days or even weeks. It makes a difference in a very practical way, we know, for folks, both not only physically and physiologically, but also mentally and emotionally as they deal with issues of life like that. I touched on earlier about helping our law enforcement and our rural fire departments. I know many of our rural communities go to great pains to try to get the first responder equipment that they need. And quite honestly, living in the poorest county in North Carolina, my home county, and also having several rural counties in our area, they just don't have the tax base to get the fire engines or to get the protective equipment for those who are called. And we realize that this is not only about protecting those communities and those tax-paying citizens, but I-95 cuts through the poorest county in North Carolina. And we know that's the major East Coast corridor from Miami all the way up to Boston and beyond. We also know that US 74, the future I-74, cuts east-west also through the center of our district and through my home county and through the counties of our district, and has a great effect economically. But if there's an accident, if there's a chemical spill, if there's an emergency, if there's a horrible fire that develops from a tragic accident, our first responders have got to get there and they got to do the job. So they're not only protecting their local communities, but on a much wider basis, they're being called upon for what could indeed be an emergency that affects folks from literally hundreds of miles throughout the area. How is USDA Rural Development involved exactly, if you'll explain? Because I know we got a lot of friends in law enforcement and fire departments and rescue squads that our office works with, but for not only those that are listening and watching, but even for the communities that are watching, let them know, well, how are we getting some return on our tax dollar? How does USDA Agriculture, how is that involved in helping fire departments, for instance?
Well, and Congress, I think, has recognized for a long time that you've got this vast area of the United States that is rural, and it doesn't have some of the tax-based elements, just as you described. Yet it bears responsibilities for challenges that come along, not necessarily the people's they're making, just as you described with the highways that move through those areas. So we have a program called Community Facilities. In the program, we can do very modest grants, we can do loans, even some very large loans for hospitals, and we can do loan guarantees for institutions that want to work through it. And quite often, communities come to us and seek grants or loans to get those exact kinds of facilities that you were describing. And we do thousands of those across the country every year. We're engaged in these public facility kinds of things, whether it might be firefighting equipment, fire trucks, police cars, ambulances, or the buildings that they need to be housed in. And so we do have that opportunity to work with it, and it does help communities get through some of those difficult challenges where they just don't have the tax base to come to grips with these key emergency services. And quite often it's a loan, so it helps them get through that, and they're repaying that.
Well, I know it's made a difference in our firefighters, for instance, having protective equipment, or our law enforcement having the kind of equipment they need to protect all citizens. And when you think about that, it's a benefit to all citizens. It's not to any special group or interest group or organization. It benefits all citizens. On another topic, I know that there are efforts to make sure we have local and regional food systems and tie-in opportunities for farmers to get their goods to market, not only across the nation, but sometimes we overlook what we've got right at home. And I know recently we had a Healthy Foods initiative for our school system in Elizabethtown, in the center of our district, and we were at Elizabethtown Primary School, and we also had someone from the Department of Agriculture come, and we talked about fresh produce and vegetables, and our local farmers benefiting from the sales of that, getting those into the schools so that our kids get better alternatives than just eating sweets and sweet desserts all the time, and also getting nutritious vegetables and fruit. So it was a win-win from a health perspective for our kids, and also obviously for our farmers in terms of being able to sell their goods locally. Tell us your knowledge about how that's working and what that does for education, for health, and for agriculture.
Yeah. Well, we see it as a huge economic opportunity, and it's a growing movement nationwide where local producers are trying to produce for local markets. And we have a particular program that helps with that. It's called a Value-Added Producer Grant, and it helps groups that want to come together and form these businesses that can provide that food on a regular basis. So it's a 50-50 grant. We give a grant for about half the project, and then the group doing it has to put up the other grant. But I think it has a tremendous economic opportunity for local markets to occur. I grew up in that kind of economy, as you probably did as well, where we had chickens and eggs and pork and dairy, and we sold that locally. Now over the years we've kind of lost a little bit of that, and it's been a missed economic opportunity for a lot of local communities. There's a great place for commercial agriculture. It does an important role, but there's a great place for this locally produced food to serve locally for local communities. And we're doing our best to encourage that, and we are approaching it from a very economic opportunity sensibility.
Well, that's great. I know also, speaking of Elizabethtown, we recently opened a farmer's market there right in downtown Elizabethtown, and what a difference that has made also to give farmers an opportunity to be able to market their goods. A lot of us did grow up with a farmer's market, we called it, on Saturday mornings or sometimes more than once a week. And we have some great agricultural centers and agribusiness centers throughout our congressional district and throughout North Carolina for that matter. And we're excited about those cooperative efforts that USDA plays a great role in. I wanted to ask you also about business. You know, we all are concerned about jobs, creating jobs. It's not only a local problem for us, it's a statewide problem, it's a regional problem, indeed a national problem in terms of making sure we can get our economy going again. One of the great programs I know a lot of folks again back home don't realize is that USDA offers to help local businesses and small businesses. And the loans that you make to small business to help them get over those hurdles. Again, sometimes getting access to capital is a huge issue for local entrepreneurs. Can you tell us some about what USDA does in rural development to help businesses?
We have several programs, and some of them are very modest grant programs that help a business get started, called Rural Business Enterprise Grant, and some are revolving loan funds. So we work with local groups and help give them revolving loan funds, and they in turn work with the businesses. One's called IRP, Intermediary Relending Program, and sometimes we give them a grant that helps them do loans, and those have been extremely successful. The businesses they've financed with them have generally been very successful, and the government has generally gotten repaid. We've gotten very high success rate with these revolving loan funds in the repayment that has to come back to USDA eventually. So we can help do seed with these groups, and they in turn work with local lenders, so it's a great combination of risk-taking that helps start businesses that quite often don't have the resources even to begin. But they just need a little hand to get going, and then they take off. And so it's worked well.
Well, I know in our area a lot of folks don't realize, they think, wow, you mean through U.S. Department of Agriculture I could get help for my small business? I know we've had all kinds of businesses that have benefited from restaurants. I was at a ribbon cutting for a restaurant up in Lumberton in my hometown in January. We kicked off the year opening another small family-owned restaurant. They could have never done it if they had not qualified for assistance from USDA, but now they can make it and can take care of that loan situation you talked about. And I know for some of these businesses, even when they're able to be eligible for a grant, it has to be merited to show what the situation is, but it's an opportunity to get jobs created. And when we talk about another dozen jobs being hired by this business, that's 12 more people, 12 more families benefiting. I know there was a bed and breakfast. I know there's been small engine repair shops. There's been a variety of different kinds of businesses that have benefited, and so our viewers should never assume, oh, that's only for X kind of business. It could be for X, Y, or Z, or maybe even A or B kind of business. So they don't know if they don't apply, and hopefully they'll take advantage of that. County commissioners have been in Washington recently, and we have county commissioners that come up here every year for their major convention, but as I often tell civic groups back home, the number one issue they bring up here is not a real exciting topic, but it's an essential one, and that's water and sewer. And I know, for instance, down in our part of North Carolina, USDA has been very involved in that effort. We realize there's a population explosion down near our coast. People are discovering the smaller beach communities and how beautiful our God-given environment is that people enjoy year-round. And so we've had explosive growth where we need to get the dirty water out and the clean water in. And we can't bring in health clinics or hospitals or schools or businesses if you don't have that. Can you tell us some about how the water sewer is an example of infrastructure that USDA is also involved in?
Yeah, we work with thousands of communities every year on that exact problem. And without that, you can't have a community. If you don't have clean water, and if you don't have sewage systems to help take away the waste, the communities just can't get there. And quite often, the point where they can build or repair the system is a pretty big capital investment, and the communities just can't afford it. So we put together combinations of grants and loans And we look at the sewer and water rates to do that, to make sure that it doesn't put the community out of line with surrounding communities and cause great problems for them. You have also particularly sensitive areas. There's communities that are in areas that might be environmentally sensitive. You have to do a little bit more with them to make sure the environment stays in good shape. But mostly we work with small communities. Communities under 10,000 people are the primary group we work with. And most of those communities are much smaller than that just don't have that tax base that they can quite make it work. And the community would fail without the kind of help we can provide.
Well, I know in Brunswick County, just in the last 4 to 5 years, there was an area that we helped that would have never been able to do it on its own because the tax base was not there. I know also, for instance, there's been a huge project up in Pender County, the Rocky Point topsoil sewer line along the near the US 17 highway corridor, and the difference that's made for the explosive area of growth there. One other topic before our time runs out. Everybody's concerned about energy and energy prices. I know that there is an effort in USDA to work on biofuels. I know that I had the opportunity as a member of both Armed Services and Agriculture committees to go witness this historic signing about 2 years ago between Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, and Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, for the U.S. Navy, for instance, to move toward biofuels. And I got to have the opportunity to fly with the Secretary down to Pax River Naval Air Station in Maryland to see the flying of the F-18 Hornet become the Green Hornet when it flew on biofuels. Can you tell us a little bit about what you see as an opening for USDA's opportunity in the area of biofuels? Because I know in our area of Eastern North Carolina we have a lot of interest in that with the agricultural products that are produced.
Yeah, there's so many good arguments to keep the ball moving forward on biofuels across the board and to seize every opportunity out there. Strategically for the United States, as you described, the Navy particularly has recognized the idea that having strategically sourced fuels that are available locally, grown locally, takes some of the weight off having to seek those fuel supplies from other parts of the world. The economic opportunity is so important. I'm a farmer. I went through the 1980s and the economic downturn we had as commercial farmers. And I know that kind of thing can happen again. What we need to do is be constantly building new industries for our agricultural commodities to be used in. And I think this is the prime example of what that's about, giving that economic opportunity to producers. There's great opportunities in animal fats being used for applying biofuels, for soybean and soybean oil and the associated crops that go with that. So across the board. We're also seeing great interest on the part of the commercial airline industry. There are planes flying in the U.S. today that are flying on biofuels. And we see that around the world. We think many countries around the world are putting the same kind of requirements on it to have biofuels related to it. So I think there's nothing but positive that can come for economic development, for producers, for communities where the jobs are created. It's a great combination of things, and we just have to keep the ball moving forward on it.
Well, you've been doing that at USDA Rural Development. Thank you for the difference you've made on the economic opportunities in Southeastern North Carolina. Many viewers may not realize, but our congressional district, I know, has benefited from having your leadership nationally, from having Randy Gore, who's a native of Brunswick County, who is our statewide director for USDA. I work with him regularly, and we've gotten a huge amount of rural development investment in Southeastern North Carolina. I appreciate Dallas Tonsager, the Undersecretary for Agriculture, being my guest today on this edition of Capital Conversations, and look forward to continuing to work with him and with USDA as we craft a new farm bill to help all of the rural economic development opportunities for our area. To those of you who are watching, I know you work hard to put food on our tables for those involved in agriculture, and we want to thank you for what you do in helping make America the world's premier agricultural system. We want to continue to fight for our nation's farmers, our small towns, and our rural communities. Please contact our offices if we can be of assistance to you. This has been another edition of Capital Conversations. Thank you for joining us. May God's blessings be with you and your family. Have a good evening.